Hey guys, what's up? It's TV Steve. In my last video, I did use myself as a guinea pig to see whether or not male enhancement pills work. So I figured that the next natural step would be to take a comprehensive look of Russian history and foreign policy. Let's do this. So I should say that this is just a perspective, and this is also based on an essay that I wrote for my composition class that I got a C- on. This is just a perspective in this theory that, Russia, everything that Russia's done has been just to impress Western powers and, not be seen as these weird, hairy Russian guys that are gonna, they're beat their wives and everything. It's not falsifiable. So this is just a perspective. And every perspective needs somewhere to start. So we're gonna go back. Further than that. Further back. Not that far. So the legend behind Kievan Rus is that there's this guy who was a Viking named Rurik. And he's the one who civilized Russia. So let me make sure that I've got this right. This guy, Rurik, a Viking, the quintessential example of European savagery and barbarism, is the one who civilized the Russians. And that's going to give you a good idea of how a lot of other countries, primarily in Western Europe, perceived Russia. I mean, even still today, just take a look at Meanwhile on Russia memes, and you'll still see that stigma and that perception really hasn't faded even now, 700, 1,000 years later. Stuff was going pretty great with the Kievan Rus, which means that it's the perfect time for things to fall apart. And that came when the Mongols invaded in the 13th century, or 12th, 13th, I don't know. I'll fix it in post. So when the Mongols and the Golden Horde were in control of Russia, it was just chaos. Absolute chaos. And this is what started the Russians' perspective of their own history in, it's either order or chaos. We either have a strong leader or a weak leader that's leading us into chaos. So who's going to be this strong leader that's going to lead Russia out from the hegemony of the Mongol horde? His name is Ivan III. He's the first person that really consolidates Russian power, and he's considered the first Tsar of Russia. So one thing that Ivan wanted to do is he wanted to legitimize Russia as a Christian state. So the first thing he does to do that is he marries this Byzantine princess named Sophia Paleolog, and she's a Byzantine princess living in Rome. And on her way to Moscow, she takes this huge 4-month-long motorcade that goes through all these tiny countries and the Holy Roman Empire. As they stop city by city, they have balls and nightly tournaments, and they give her gifts, the way you would treat a princess. But also what it does is it really shows her off to all of the tiny countries in the Holy Roman Empire and all the countries that they're aligned with. Because if you take a look at Sophia Paleologina, she's not half bad looking for being 500 years old. So really what they're doing is they're showing her off to all the Western European countries. And then they start thinking, Russia may not be all these big, hairy, scary, barbarian dudes who beat their wives and everything like that. Maybe they're getting it together, and they really were. Like this next guy that we're going to talk about, Ivan IV. He really made Russia expand, made Russia seem powerful, But also, so it demonstrates that agency, but also it really makes Russia more secure. Because Russia is on the Eurasian steppe, which is very easy to invade. That's how they got invaded by the Mongols. So it increases the security of Russia. Seems to be going pretty great for the Tsardom of Russia and the Rurikid dynasty, which means it's the perfect time for things to fall apart. And that's going to happen with the next Tsar that we're going to talk about. His name's Fyodor I, and he dies without an heir, causing a succession crisis. And that plunges Russia into the time of troubles. When people talk about Russia wavering between chaos and order, the time of troubles is usually the first thing or the primary thing that they'll refer to. And it was pretty bad. And so who's going to be our big, he's great, he's amazing, he's going to save Russia, he's going to make Russia great again. His name was Mikhail Romanov. Yay! And he's the one who started the Romanov dynasty, which would last centuries up until the collapse in the Bolshevik Revolution. It's time to talk about the Enlightenment and the Renaissance.
Music make you lose control.
So the two people that you need to know, these Enlightened Renaissance rulers, are going to be Peter the Great and Catherine the Great. And Catherine was an expansionist, and Peter, he built St. Petersburg, and also he beat the Swedish in the Great Northern War, which, demonstrated Russia's power, Russia's prowess, and also gave them a great amount of control over Northern Europe and the Baltic Sea. But the most important thing that you gotta know about Peter and Catherine is that they really took on Enlightenment ideals. And they did this by engaging, a bunch of social reforms. So they had men cut their beards, get rid of that hairy stigma. And they also banned a practice where a whip would be passed down to the groom on the wedding day. I wasn't lying about that beat their wives type of thing. Thing is, these changes, they only took place on the upper levels of society. The only ones that foreigners from Western European countries were going to do. So it was really only to impress those guys. But the life in Russia wasn't made better. There was still serfdom. It was still pretty crappy. So what Russia's actually trying to do with these social reforms is they're saying, please take us seriously. We're not those weird hairy Russian dudes that got conquered by the Mongols and civilized by the Vikings. We're cool. We have this new city called St. Petersburg, and it's really cool, and it has these pretty weird colorful roofs, and we have these new churches with onion domes on them. We're okay. We're powerful. Please take us seriously. And people will take them seriously soon, because now we're in the 19th century, and it's Napoleonic Wars time. And what you need to know about Russia and the Napoleonic Wars is that Russia kicked Napoleon's ass. Right? I mean, Napoleon kicked everyone else's ass, but Napoleon invades Russia in the winter, and all of a sudden he runs all the way back to Paris with his tail between his legs. And this really demonstrates Russia's power, to the rest of the world. And it shows them that Russia has their own agency. They can hold their own, right? And that sort of agency is, what makes this war so legendary in Russian history and the way that they perceive their own history. That they literally call it Отечественная война, or the patriotic war. So it really showed how powerful Russia would be, and they hadn't even industrialized yet. Keep in mind, this is 1812. Industrial Revolution is just now taking shape, and it's getting started. And everybody was kind of just on the edge of their seat, like, uh-oh, once Russia industrializes, they're going to be really powerful, and it's going to be really scary. But it took a while for Russia to industrialize. And their failure to industrialize was really shown to heart. I don't know why I dropped that script. I still need it. Their failure to industrialize was really demonstrated in the Crimean War. If you want to know why the Crimean War started, it was basically France was like, we have the right to defend the holy sites in the whole faith because Pope Innocent Charles made the protector of the Christian faith in the 5th, 6th, or 7th century. I don't know. My dad can beat up your dad. And Russia's like, no, we're the true protectors of the Christian faith because we're the fourth one because we married the Byzantine princess. My dad can beat your dad. And that's basically how the Crimean War started. Russia's facing off against these industrialized countries. The United Kingdom, France, Sardinia. And they bring about 500,000 troops to the front lines. Russia, because they weren't industrialized, was only able to bring 50,000. And the Ottomans, who they were at war with too, who were also involved in that, brought over 1 million.
Hey guys, TV Steve here, editing this video in post. Well, those are some interesting numbers that I said right there. Now you may be wondering where I got them, and the answer is I have no idea either. So this is awkward. In the source that I got those numbers, I just completely ignored that there were 270,000 troops stationed in St. Petersburg, but a lot of them were going against repelling Austrian invasions from Galicia. It was only 50,000 troops that were able to make it to Crimea. I mean, that is still a disadvantage from, the 120,000 French or the 27,000 English, and it's 400,000 Ottomans. I don't know where I got 1 million. It was probably over, 1 million troops total that the Russians were fighting. And also, I didn't even notice this when I got back to the source. 800,000 serfs conscripted into the war. That just goes to show, even though they had much larger numbers, if you take a look at Russia's population at the time, and the populations of the empires at the time of the war, Russia still had a major population advantage and a numbers advantage, but they still couldn't pull it out and win the war.
And the events that led up to the Crimean War is what started was part of this growing sentiment, growing anti-Russian sentiment that was going on during the 19th century. And another way that this anti-Russian sentiment became very prominent was during the Great Game. The Great Game was basically this huge, planet-sized diplomatic chess game standoff. Hello, doggy. Get out of my room, doggy. Get out of my room. Planet-sized diplomatic standoff between Russia and the United Kingdom. While the Western countries, France, Germany, all those guys, while they were scrambling for Africa, Russia was going down to Central Asia, making Central Asian tribes submit to their hegemony. And Russia was really successful with this. They had an alliance with Persia until the United Kingdom broke it up. And they even had serious influence in Tibet thanks to this guy named Aghban Dajiev, who was a Russian Buddhist living in Tibet. And what were the United Kingdom doing? Well, the Russians were just slowly creeping towards India, the crown jewel of their empire. They tried to invade Afghanistan 3 times and failed epically bad. That's awkward. Growing anti-Russian sentiment, and that was just part of the big, tangled, crazy webs of alliances that were developing during the 19th century, which eventually led to the World War I, if I can find the script. What you need to know about Russian World War I is that it didn't go well for them, and Tsar Nicholas was starting to look like one of these guys, these weak Russian leaders that was going to lead Russia into another state of chaos and disorder. And that is exactly what happened after his assassination. And Russia was plunged into this chaotic civil war. It was awful, it was terrible, and oh my god, it's chaos, and no, who's going to save us? Who's going to save us? His name was Vladimir Lenin, his Bolshevik party. And this is the watershed moment in Russian history. Right? They were going to industrialize under the Soviet regime. No longer were they trying to be seen as, hey, we're capable, hey, we're really strong. Instead, they were saying, hey, we're the best. We're the greatest there is. Marxism is the greatest there is, because that's what Marxism is all about. It's about expanding Marxism. And that's when their quest to impress and demonstrate their power to Western powers becomes antagonistic, because they were starting to defend an ideology. And there wasn't a better stage for them to show the superiority of their communist Marxist ideology than in World War II, fighting fascists who had like a literally opposite ideology, right? So let's have a recap of World War II. Hitler basically kicks a bunch of Western power countries' asses, right? I mean, Russia was getting their ass kicked initially, but they slowly, single-handedly beat back the most powerful land army that the world had ever seen. Again, right? And this demonstrates their agency, That's why they call it Velikaya Отечественная война, or the Great Patriotic War. So now Russia's a superpower, and so they want to demonstrate their power against other people. We're in the Cold War now, and if you really don't understand how the Cold War is just Russia trying to demonstrate their power to, Western powers, then I'll put together a little highlight reel of stuff that you may have missed. collapses. And the guy who's in power, he's this dude named Boris Yeltsin, and he's basically just an American puppet in the Russian people's eyes. He's seen as another one of these weak, incompetent leaders that leads Russia into chaos, and it was pretty rough in Russia. In the 1990s, people were living off of vegetables that they grew in their backyards. It wasn't great. So, who's going to save us? Who's going to make Russia great again? Russia, who's going to save us? Who's going to be our big, strong, hairy man that's going to save Russia? His name was Vladimir Putin. So Putin represents a lot of the things that people like to see in Russian leaders, or that Russians like to see in Russian leaders. He's competent. He has a strong ideology. You know, he brings stability. He's made Russia more powerful on the world stage, and he's demonstrated Russia's agency, you know, with the insurrections that happened in Georgia, or the invasion of Crimea in Ukraine back in 2014. But also, Putin is a former KGB agent. He still has that, like, Soviet, you know, mindset about him where, you know, he's defending an ideology, and that's why everything he sees is like a zero-sum game. Putin wants to make Russia compete increasingly confidently in the economic, political, and military spheres. And he may think that many are not pleased with this development. Perhaps some forces in the world would like to see Russia remain weak and to see Russia develop according to laws dictated from outside. Nevertheless, he wants to make Russia demonstrate increasing autonomy and ability to resolve its internal problems, to solve them alone without looking to others for guidance, as well as the capacity to influence the development of the global economy and the modern world order. He wants to make Russia able to protect its people and its national interests, and to make its armed forces seem capable and professional. Those aren't my words. Those are Dmitry Medvedev, who is a former president of the Russian Federation, Putin's former vice president, and he still has a very significant role in the Russian government today. So if you don't want to take my word for it, take his. So now you're caught up to where we are right now. So where does Russia go from right now? Well, Russia is currently facing a population crisis. There's basically a little dip that happens every 30 years or so as a generational thing because of all the people that died during the Second World War. But Russia has the ability to expand its population because climate change is making a lot of its land more habitable. It's just falling out, and that tundra and taiga, which was formerly uninhabitable, is now becoming habitable. But as that land thaws out, a lot of it is melting into the Arctic Ocean, which is warming up. But as the Arctic Ocean warms up, a lot of that sea ice melts, which means that new trade routes are going to be opened up, which Russia can take control over. So Russia's basically trying to impress Western powers, demonstrate their prowess. My sources are in the description if you don't believe me. Next week's probably going to be a review of The Last of Us 2, maybe about the history of soap. I don't know yet, and make sure to subscribe and like if you like the video.